this important conversation that affects entirely the whole world and especially Ugandans, and that is our financial security. I'm Idris Matusegawa, and I'm honored to be your moderator today as we unpack the vision and the work of the Financial Sector Anti-Fraud Consortium. Now, the AFC, as it is known, is a powerful alliance bringing together Uganda's key financial institutions, the Uganda Bankers Association, Payment Systems Providers Association, and major regulators, including the Bank of Uganda, Uganda Communications Commission, I beg your pardon, and the Financial Intelligence Authority. Now, together they form a united front in the fight against financial fraud. And I'm pleased to welcome Dr. I don't want to pronounce your name incorrectly, and I'm going to avoid doing so. Because it's a very beautiful name, but I do not want to pronounce it incorrectly. Doctor, could you have the pleasure of introducing yourself, sir?
Yes, thank you. So my name is Tumubwene Twinemanzi.
Indeed.
But just to ease your work today, just call me Twine.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
I think Twine is much easier.
And
yes.
You are the Executive Director of National Payment Systems at the Bank of Uganda. Could you just briefly tell us what that is?
So, the National Payments Directorate at the Bank of Uganda was only established, I believe, in September last year. So, prior to September, we didn't have a dedicated directorate in the Bank of Uganda dealing with matters of national payments. That's payment system providers, payment system operators, e-money issuers, and other payment service fintechs in particular, involved within the payment space. So, and considering that there's been a significant amount of innovation in this area, one. Two, that a significant portion of economic activity was actually going through these payments platforms. They achieved a level of significance, or what we call systemic importance, that the board of the Bank of Uganda decided that it's time that we have one whole directorate dedicated to understanding and ensuring that these entities and financial service providers play within the law and do so in a manner that is prudent and that does not affect the stability of the financial system.
All right.
Yes.
Doctor, now the Financial Sector Anti-Fraud Consortium, what is it? Why was it formed? And what is the problem that this consortium is trying to solve in Uganda?
Okay, so first, what is the Anti-Fraud Consortium? Like you said earlier on, it's a collection or a gathering of regulators within the financial sector. You have licensees or financial service providers, we call them FSPs. You have payment service providers. You have operators of payment systems. You have the Uganda Communications Commission, you have the Financial Intelligence Authority, and the whole idea was that we realized that the reason why fraud was becoming pervasive was, one, there was hardly any cooperation, information sharing between the service providers who were suffering these losses, and of course subsequently it was also affecting their customers. So the first problem was, the first issue we're trying to address was information sharing. Between
the customer and the service providers?
Not just between the customer and the service provider, even between the service providers, because often the nature of the fraud was that it started in one institution and was concluded in another. You had a fraud incident in a bank and the money was taken out through mobile money or an agent. So that you're crossing two regulatory jurisdictions, okay? For the mobile money agent to be able to work, his platform lies on a telecom network which is regulated by UCC.
So it's all interconnected.
So they're all interconnected. So because you see, the nature of the fraud that we have especially been seeing, it has no respect for jurisdictional boundaries. It has no respect for geographical boundaries. So we decided that, you know, as a starting point, let everyone who is within this space, those that provide the telecom platforms, those that use the telecom platform, the rails, so to speak, let's get together at one place and start by, at a minimum, sharing information. Okay? And of course, one of the aims of the Anti-Fraud Consortium is that we intend to onboard security agencies, the judicial system, and everyone else, consumer protection agencies and associations, have all of them on board. The whole idea is fraud, as it's done in this country, especially fraud within the financial sector, takes advantage of the fact that players within the financial sector, much as they cooperate and do business together, they are misers on information between themselves.
They do not want to share information.
They do not want to share information. Yeah. Why? Because as a financial institution, if I entrust you with my money and you report a fraud, I begin to question and say, if that can happen to you, what happens to my money? Okay? Which goes to the root, again, of much as we've started in the financial sector. At some point, we hope it will become wider. The financial sector, you might ask, and I think you asked, why? Why the financial sector? The financial sector is unique in the sense that it doesn't provide a service per se. Financial sector does not sell credit or sell deposit services or sell insurance or sell unit trust business. No. The financial sector, the main commodity is trust.
If I don't trust your bank, if I don't trust your
insurance
service,
company, if I don't trust you,
I don't give you my money.
Exactly.
Indeed.
So what does fraud do? Fraud erodes that trust. And anything that erodes trust, and with trust being the very bedrock and foundation of financial sector services, anything that affects that affects the financial service, affects the financial service providers, affects the financial service consumers. And that's the gist and the basis for the formation of the Anti-Fraud Consortium.
So how does AFC, as the consortium has been formed, how do you plan to eradicate these problems that are faced by the financial sector? And majorly, as you mentioned, the issue of trust. And basically, these fraudsters using the opportunity of the fact that probably these service providers are not sharing information, as you mentioned earlier. So how does AFC come in and eradicate this problem?
So, like I said, the first approach is deal with the information issue. You cannot attempt to solve fraud, which by its very nature anyways, it's never public, okay, without first sharing information about fraud incidents. So the idea was, we start with information sharing and collaboration, okay? Regulators, investigative arms of government, the judicial officers, the security agencies, the service providers, and the consumers. Okay? So we are hoping we'll get to a situation where if a consumer receives a weird, funny call, someone calling you and saying, by the way, you have won or something,
20 billion.
All you have to do is be able to log that particular number and report it.
To the consortium?
Yes, so there'll be a centralized reporting portal. Initially, it's going to be first for service providers, but at some point in the future, we hope to bring on consumers.
Okay. So it will be open to the public?
It will be open to the public. Not at this stage, but down the road. That's the future we see.
Of course, definitely.
So, so once we deal with, have all those who have information about fraud incidents, share that information. That's the first step. If I suffer a fraud incident, attempted or was successful, and I have one central place where I can report it, and others who are in the same business with me can see that information, one, see how it was done, find out who was possibly involved. Then in time they can find out from their own back office if their systems are susceptible to that kind of fraud. Then they kind of lock up. Two, if those persons who are suspected to be involved, if they also have an existing relationship with them. Now, we're not saying that they will close it. No, listen. We're not saying that you stop providing them a service. But you flag them. as high risk.
So that you know if this kind of customer is doing this or that?
This kind of customer has done this somewhere else, has been suspected of doing this somewhere else. I need to watch him or her or them a bit more careful. So that any unusual transactions or activities on the accounts, or if they're providing you a service, if for example, the person who has been involved in a fraud incident in one bank is providing you internet service or internet security services, I think you would want to know that.
Indeed.
Okay?
In a way, creating awareness about what's happening.
Yes.
And in that way, informing and sharing information.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Is there any other probably ways that you have put in place or you plan to put in place to curb this issue? Maybe even down the road, probably. Because I know you have plans for the future. So are there certain things that you have identified and realized that if we do this, probably it will help the financial sector as a whole and also the customers and also the...
Yeah, so the first thing is the information sharing. But then the thing is, we've also noticed there was the Uganda Bankers Association contracted a law firm to do an assessment of the existing legal framework in terms of what the legal framework says about dealing with fraud or fraudulent activities, and even the penalties that are in. And the assessment was, the penalties are not deterrent. They're not punitive. So what's the first thing? If you want to minimize or reduce the impact of fraud, make fraud expensive. You see, human beings are very interesting.
They are.
We respond very well to incentives. If I can do something and get away with it, I'll do it.
Continue doing it.
We see it on the roads. Okay? There's even a whole theory, school of study around fraud. There's a fraud theory that talks about the preconditions that encourage fraud. So the question is, if we can create an environment or put in place an environment where being involved in fraud or associated with fraud becomes extremely expensive, both in terms of monetary time or monetary value, pecuniary, but also in terms of time and even consequences to you.
Indeed.
Yeah. So one of the things is regulatory reforms. But you see, Bank of Uganda can't just amend its own laws without having other actors and regulators also look at their laws to do what? To plug it.
To consolidate.
Now you understand why we call it a consortium. We realize that all of us need to go in and have a look at our own laws and make sure that if you conduct the fraud in the banking sector, it might be punitive, but we don't want you to go ahead and now try and do it in the insurance sector or in the pension sector.
Yeah.
Okay? So, regulatory reform. Second, when it comes to investigations of fraud, we have since realized, because remember that these fraudsters, and I think, like I said earlier on today at the event, some of them I think are deserving of Nobel Prizes in terms of the level of the ingenuity and sophistication
they used to commit fraud.
To be able to get information or solicit information about persons or people in order to defraud them. Okay? They're really ingenious. But what it does then for the service providers who are going to be affected and for us the regulators is that we have to try and keep up with them. Okay? Someone says the best way to catch a thief is to
indeed.
But then we're not. We don't have that thinking. Now, the investigative officers that we have, police, DPP, IGG, and all the other law enforcement agencies, we decided that as a consortium, our job is going to be compile best practice on investigation, identification and investigation, identify the tools, and find ways of making these tools and knowledge and capacity available to the law enforcement agencies. Because having this in place and not having those who are going to conduct the investigations even aware and knowledgeable and understand how the threat landscape for fraud is evolving is pointless.
It breaks down the chain and
And that's why, as part of the consortium, the judiciary has to be involved. Today, we actually had the director of public prosecution herself attend. Okay? Those are the prosecutors, the investigators. They all need to understand what fraud is, how it is perpetuated, and how it evolves over time.
Indeed.
And then, lastly, even with messages, when different agencies, different service providers come up with their messages, they talk about fraud. You know, there's this thing of Bearer Steady and a few others. That was being done by the MMOs. Shouldn't there be one for the insurance company? Shouldn't there be one for the banking sector?
Yeah.
Should there be
For
one
all the shareholders and
microfinances? How about all of you that if we're going to talk about fraud, let's send out a common message. And that's the idea. That's one of the areas we're talking about. Yeah.
The message I'm hearing from you, Doctor, is together we go far.
Yes.
So what impact do you foresee the AFC having, especially on the public? Because I understand the financial service providers could be having probably more knowledge than the public, that the mere customer who gets a phone call from someone speaking very fluent English saying you've won 50 million, and I'm ought to believe them. What impact do you foresee AFC having?
So one of the things under the AFC is that we also, in there as regulators, we are telling the regulated entities, the financial service providers, that you still have a duty of care. It's your responsibility to make sure your customer understands your product or your service.
Indeed.
Okay? So the duty of care does not go away. But also, and this is where we come in as regulators and perhaps even as the AFC, customers also need to educate themselves on their service that they're using.
You can't think that
because
our trust...
I hate to say this and it might sound elitist or arrogant, but we can't protect you from your own stupidity.
Doctor. Okay. Ignorance, perhaps?
No.
I could not know.
I'll give an example.
Yes.
If someone goes out and spends 3-4 million shillings buying a brand new phone, it comes with the money. The manufacturer of the phone, in their wisdom, said, much of this item is going to be expensive.
Yes.
I think I need to provide the money on how best to use
it.
For users to protect themselves. And you spend 4-5 million shillings buying a phone, it comes with the money, and the first thing you do is throw away the money.
Because it's too much to read.
Down the road, in using the services, you don't know how to even protect yourself. Yet the manual would have told you the best way to go about protecting yourself in using the device.
So, Doctor, what are you telling us, the customers?
No, I'm not saying the customers at fault.
Yeah.
The service provider has a duty of care.
Yeah.
In the financial sector
to make sure we understand the service.
That you understand the service. Indeed. I shouldn't sell you a product. I shouldn't sell you a service or get you to subscribe for a service that I haven't helped you understand, both in terms of how it benefits you and what might be the potential dangers of using it. Okay?
Yeah.
But even on the side of the consumer,
should be more vigilant.
We also have an obligation.
Indeed. You're right,
okay?
Doctor. You're indeed right.
That if I'm going to take on a service, I'm going to sign up and have these apps. For example, most people, when you're downloading apps, which is why some of us may be considered old-fashioned, is that most apps will ask for access to your gallery. So now, you are downloading an app to read e-books and asking for access to your gallery. Why?
Why?
And yet you go ahead and say yes.
Yes, because...
Thank you very much.
This is where the ignorance comes in.
Yes. So because we know that from a behavioral perspective, the average consumer is not going to want to be bothered with the details about the service.
Terms and conditions, which
are more concerned
100
with
pages.
What it can do for them.
Indeed.
So then we say, okay, we're going to try to the level that we can to protect them. So what we're doing is focusing on post-mortem initially. In other words, like someone once said that there are only two kinds of people in the world. Those who have been defrauded and those who have not yet been defrauded.
Who are waiting for their turn.
Who are waiting for their turn.
I hope we never get the turn.
So then what you do is, and what the AFC stands to do, is say, in the event a fraud happens,
How do I deal with it?
How do we deal with it? Not I.
We.
The police who will do the investigations, the DPP who will do the prosecution, the judges that will rule these matters, the service provider who customer has suffered this loss or potential loss, the regulator of that service provider. As a community, how do you respond? In other words, yes, the fraudster might get away with it, but once we have flagged them, and like someone today was saying, once we have flagged them, there will be ample evidence and skills and capacity within this whole sector to actually take this matter through the legal process to get a redress. Now, at the event, someone was even suggesting that in the event of conviction for fraud, for example, financial sector fraud, maybe perhaps you should be denied financial services. For good? For a certain time period. We are hoping that at some point you'll be reformed. Hopefully. That's why prison sentences have a maximum term. No one sends you to prison indefinitely.
Forever.
Okay? Maybe those that have been convicted, maybe.
Are there other sort of suggestions under the law that have been made, probably from within?
Yes. So, for example, some regulators can, depending on the kind of situation, cases they deal with, can seek to have what they call it, the power to prosecute. See, prosecution is under the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, right? But they can delegate it to certain regulators for certain kind of specialized prosecutions. So that, for example, if the DPP is prosecuting in a matter and maybe it is of such complexity that requires, someone from Bank of Uganda because they understand the legal aspects of financial transactions, maybe that will become part of the prosecution team. So that is one idea.
Indeed.
Okay. The other one is to say, okay, when it comes to investigation, that's the purview and the responsibility of the Uganda police and the criminal investigation department. But if they don't have the skill set, is there someone in one of the regulators or perhaps even one of the service providers who can assist them? And there was a case like this sometime back in 2020 where there was a fraud, and the affected bank made available its IT team to the police forensics team in conducting the investigation. So what we're just saying is we're trying to formalize this.
Over the years, Doctor, what kind of reports have you probably received, maybe under the consortium or even personally under your department at the BOU? What kind of reports have you received that are indicating either is there an increase in fraud cases or a decrease?
Now, I'm going to just share some information here with you. If we look at the Uganda Police Force Annual Crime Report for 2024, and we're just going to look at one form of financial fraud, which is cyber fraud within the financial sector. Just cyber. I'm not talking about cash separation where you go and deposit the money over the counter and someone does not declare it, but it gives you a slip as though it is stamped to indicate the money has been credited to your account. Just cyber crimes. If you look at the period 2020 to 2024, in 2020, the cases reported were 256. In 2023, there were 245, a drop by 14, was about 11, sorry. Guess where we are at the end of 2024? 474.
Oh, wow.
Almost 100% increment. Now, of course, people say, wait a minute, so there's been a 100% increase in fraud. No. It is possible, like the gentleman who was presenting this from the Bankers Association, that maybe people are more confident to come out and report these matters, so the number goes up because more people are reporting. Because remember, they said about the one thing about fraud, it is embarrassing most times when you're being defrauded. because you realize that they took advantage of your, that word I didn't want to say earlier on. They took advantage of you.
Indeed.
In some way. Okay?
And the moment you realize it, you...
But you can't report it, because when you report it, you say, what are they going to think?
What were you thinking?
What was I thinking?
A whole doctor?
Yes.
Indeed. So
that kind of fraud doesn't get reported, but maybe perhaps it's possible where you have this 100% increment over a 12-month period, from 23 to 2024.
Yeah.
Is maybe people now are more
comfortable coming out and saying, to share information.
Sharing information.
Which goes back to your key objective.
Okay. Or maybe indeed the fraud incidents have increased. We don't have that detail yet, but in this fraud consortium, because the Uganda Police and the Criminal Investigation Department will be part of the consortium, then we'll be able to get into the details to understand such an increase. And if the case is that people are now more willing to report fraud, then make sure that the mechanisms to make it even easier for them to report fraud are in place. If it's a question that fraud has increased, maybe then the service providers should be asked and helped or assisted to ensure that they make the systems even stronger.
Yeah.
Okay?
Doctor, as we conclude this conversation today, clearly there is need for much to be done. Apart from the public associations and commissions, what other partners are you looking at as a consortium to go with on this journey? So,
the other partners will be what I would call international partners or external partners. And I'll tell you why. Because increasingly, someone sits in Nigeria but commits fraud in Uganda. Someone sits in Dubai and commits fraud in Kenya. Or someone sits in Uganda, commits fraud in Uganda and moves to Kenya. Now I know internationally you have Interpol and so on, that's the international police. But how about if at the minimum, the various industry associations across borders chose to cooperate and share information? Okay? Within the Anti-Money Laundering Act and provisions and regime that we have in this country, there's something called mutual legal assistance. That even if I'm investigating a matter that seems to suggest that I need to follow up one or two persons in your jurisdiction, okay, we need to have some form of some arrangement in place that allows me either to conduct the investigation there or to ask you to conduct the investigation there on my behalf to help me conclude mine.
Indeed.
So there will have to be either country-to-country arrangements, either between police or judiciary or investigating arms or even industry associations, by the way.
Yeah.
You don't even have to have the police involved necessarily. Okay? If money moves from Uganda and gets deposited in the UK, the UK has a bankers association. Can the Uganda Bankers Association talk to the other one and say, look here, we need information on this to help the investigating officers in Uganda conclude this matter?
Doctor,
yes,
for sure, sharing of information is quite important for the key objectives as a consortium you have. To conclude, because we have run out of time, what is the last word for the financial sector and also for the public that you have?
You know, there's an adage in real estate that three things matter in real estate: location, location, location. And I think I would say win the fight for fraud. Information, information,
information. Indeed. Quite simple words, but powerful. Yes. Doctor, thank you so much for the conversation today. I'm sure the people who are viewing this conversation have learned something and probably have a keen eye to not be the other word, but to make sure that you do not fall a victim of fraud. Well, thank you so much for watching this conversation on the consortium, the mandate of the financial sector, Anti-Fraud Consortium. To continue the conversation, go to our social media platforms, that is NTV. Use the hashtag combating financial fraud in Uganda. Be sure to Be vigilant and alert so that you don't fall victim. I'm Idris Matusegawa, and catch you next time.